First of all, thanks everyone for coming out today, and I too want to start, as Senator Thorpe and others have done, by acknowledging this is First Nations land. And when you go and you advocate with the Palestinian community and their friends, and you understand that connection to country and land and culture, we need to acknowledge the ongoing genocide against First Nations peoples on this land. Yes. And I just got back from the NT as part of a Senate inquiry into the appalling youth justice disaster across this country. First Nations kids being whisked from home and country, put in torture-like conditions in jails. And if that's not a military occupation of the Northern Territory and parts of this country to steal resources and steal culture, I don't know what is. So let's commit to acknowledge this is First Nations land, to end the crisis of youth justice where kids are being taken and stolen from family and country, and to demand the Australian government say you can't torture First Nations kids, and to close First Nations kids' jails. Close them across this country, wherever they are. But this is now 8 decades of Nakba, 8 decades of dispossession and violence, and there's no one day where the Nakba started, there's no one day where the Nakba ends, it continues. But what we should acknowledge is that it began in terrorism. It began in violence, in ethnic cleansing, in genocide, in the destruction of villages, the killing of and raping of women, and the violence against the Palestinian people, and the world stood by and let it happen. And we hear, stories, alternate stories about how the State of Israel was created. But we will not forget the truth, that it began in violence, began in ethnic cleansing, it began in terrorism, and we see the truth for what it is. And that's part of what we're doing today, to acknowledge the Nakba, the reality of the Nakba. But we've continued to see this so-called ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire in Gaza, and it's never been a ceasefire in Gaza, and it's not a ceasefire in the West Bank. There are kids who were going to school in the West Bank who were shot dead by settlers with the military standing beside. Not a decade ago, but a week ago and a month ago. Families who wanted to connect and catch up with relatives on a drive home, stopped and gunned to death in their car by the Israeli military. That's not a matter of history. That's a matter that's happening now. And what we see with our government is basic silence. Silence and complicity, as Israel is now creating a fresh Nakba in the south of Lebanon. Yes. Silence, complicity, but ultimately support. And sometimes you ask yourself, well, how is this happening? How is a government that's meant to be representing us, concepts of democracy and human rights and freedom, how is it that we can continue to supply weapons parts to Israel? How is it we buy weapons from Israel that they're tested in Lebanon, or they're tested in Yemen, or they're tested in Gaza? How is it that we don't just buy, small amounts? We're buying billions of dollars of Israeli weapons tested on the Palestinian people. Contracts signed under the Labor government. How is this happening? And I think we're getting a lesson in how the world works. For so long, there's been this convenient narrative of the rules-based order, that we sign on to this agenda led by the United States, which is about democracy and freedom and international order. And that has never been true. It's always been about power. It's always been about privilege. It's always been about resources. But it had this patter, this sales pitch that we all listened to, and some of us accepted. But who can look at the war on Iran now and pretend it's about democracy or the rule of law or international law? Who can look at the obscenity in Gaza and pretend that it's about any of that? We see the truth now. It's about violence, it's about oppression, it's about power, and it's about corporate interests. And now that the mask has been ripped off, we've got to ask ourselves, what do we do? Will we continue doing this? And we tell the truth about the Nakba. And we continue doing this, and we stand in solidarity with First Nations peoples in their fight for liberty in this country, and we stand in solidarity with Palestinians wherever they are standing and resisting the occupation. Of course we do that. But then we need to ask ourselves, how did this country get in this position? How are we just a lapdog, worse than a lapdog, a complicit player in US violence across the world? Because that's what's happening here. The US sees Israel as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and do you know what? They are increasingly seeing Australia as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in their war on China in our region too. The same powers, the same forces. So what do? Well, we organise here too. We organise here to do things like to kill the AUKUS agreement. No more US troops. And we convert hundreds of billions of dollars from nuclear submarines and US weapons platforms to health and education and climate action and international solidarity. That's what we do. And we stop pretending that we can change the Labor Party. We start organising to replace the Labor Party. And I don't care if you're green or you're purple or you're pink, let's join together and stop pretending that Albanese or Wong or Richard Marles can be persuaded to do the right thing. We need to replace them. And if you want proof positive that every time when they make a statement, it's nothing more than a social media meme, there's no substance to it. Just on Friday, on Nakba Day itself, myself and my Greens colleagues in the ACT joined together with the Palestinian ambassador to organise a Nakba breakfast in Canberra, in the heart of our democracy. And I want to thank the ambassador for coming, and I want to thank the Palestinian community for coming for that breakfast on Friday. But they'll tell you this, we were there acknowledging the Palestinian ambassador, his role and the role of the embassy in representing the people of Palestine. And we know it's complicated. But you know, our government pretended to recognise Palestine. Do you remember that? When hundreds of thousands of people walked across the harbour bridge, tens of thousands gathered here, hundreds of thousands across the country, and we forced Labor to move, or so we thought. And they recognised Palestine, or so they said. Do you know the Labor government, Penny Wong, has still refused to accept the Palestinian ambassador's credentials in this country? They refuse to call him an ambassador. They refuse to even acknowledge the existence of a Palestinian embassy in here. And they continue to say things like, we're not going to move until other like-minded countries have moved. Well, even the United Kingdom has acknowledged their ambassador and their embassy. France, Canada and others. Our government is captured by Washington. Our government and its foreign policy and its defence policy is owned and run not out of Canberra, but out of Washington, and we should acknowledge it for what it is. So now the mask has been ripped off. Join with us. Join with the millions of Australians who want to cancel the AUKUS agreement. Join with the millions of Australians who want a government that stands for peace and democracy and actually commits to supporting Palestinian rights. And let's show that commitment to Palestine by changing our country too. So thanks so much for coming out. Thank you for telling the truth. We will end the Nakba. We will free Palestine and we'll free our country while we're at it. Thanks very much.
Authorised by J. McCall, Australian Greens, Canberra.